Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining our session of today, Talking Trees and Happy Plants, the secret life of mycorrhizal fungi. Our session of today will be presented by Beth. Beth is originally from the UK and has been living in the Netherlands for 4 years, where she studied her master's on bio-inspired innovation from Utrecht University. Here, she studied a broad range of topics related to biology and sustainability. Part of her master's allowed her to participate in the research group Plant-Microbe Interactions, where she investigated the relationship between plant mycorrhizal fungi and beneficial bacteria in the soil. So before giving the floor to Beth, I would like to make 2 announcements. First one, we will record the session. So if you need to drop off soon, you can come back later and watch it again. And for questions, please wait at the end of the presentation where we will have a Q&A session and Beth will be answering all your questions. Thank you and enjoy the presentation.
Thank you very much, Indira. I'm just going to share my screen. Yeah, so are you able to see the PowerPoint, everyone?
Yes.
Okay, great. So hi, everyone. I'm Beth. Thank you for coming to my presentation on mycorrhizal fungi. These are fungi that live in the soil and form these really important symbioses with the roots of plants. So before we begin, I've decided to make this presentation a little bit interactive. So if you want to participate, you can scan this QR code here. And then I'm just going to be asking a few questions throughout the presentation. So while you're logging in, I'm going to explain what we're going to be talking about today. So first of all, I'm going to explain what mycorrhiza are and the different types of mycorrhiza that we have. Next, we're going to look at how mycorrhizae evolved to be what they are today, and then how they benefit the plants in terms of nutrient exchange and other benefits. Then I'm going to discuss how trees are able to communicate with one another via the action of a common mycelial network, otherwise known as the Wood Wide Web. Then we're going to be briefly looking at how mycorrhizae can impact climate change. Then we're going to look at some studies, how we can improve mycorrhizae, and then we're going to have a little Q&A at the end. So I've included this quote here, farmers of the future work together with their fungi. And this was a quote from Toby Kears, who is a leading mycorrhizal researcher. And I'm not going to explain what this means just yet. I'm hoping it will become clear as I go through the presentation. So before we start, I'm already going to throw in the first Mentimeter now. And I would like you guys to vote on how much you know about mycorrhizal fungi already. So do you already know a lot about them? You would say you're an expert. You know a little bit about them. So you've done a bit of reading, but you don't know so much. You know, you've heard of them, the name rings a bell, or you've never heard of them before this presentation. So I'll just give it a minute and then we can move on. So I see there's only 3 people logged in, so we have 3 responses. So I'm going to go forward. Oh, we have 4. Nice. So I'm hoping the people, especially that don't know so much about it, are going to learn something today. I'm going to ask this question at the end as well, and I'm hoping that the answers are going to shift a little towards the left. So let's get into it. What are mycorrhizae? Mycorrhiza comes from the Greek word mycos and the Latin word rhiza, which literally translates to fungus root. Now, the first word mycos, meaning fungus, that's easy. It is a fungus. And the second word rhiza, meaning root, that's for 2 reasons. It's because these mycorrhizae, they kind of look a little bit like plant roots, a lot smaller and a lot thinner. You can see them here growing out of these plant roots here and here. But also because they form this really important symbioses with plant roots. So let's remind ourselves what a symbiosis is again. It is the living together of 2 dissimilar organisms in which, in most cases, they both benefit from this association. Mycorrhizae is often referred to as an extension to the plant's own root system. Now, what do we mean by this? Well, as you can see in these pictures here, these are 2 Douglas fir seedlings. And this one is grown without mycorrhizae, and it just has these three kind of root structures here. And this one is grown with mycorrhizae, and you can see all of this in white is the mycorrhizal fungus. And what it does is it extends the plant's reach into the soil by up to 100 times, so it can more easily find nutrients and water, for example. And these are just some of the different names that I'm going to be referring to these mycorrhizae as throughout the presentation, just so you're aware. I might call them mycorrhizae, or just a fungus, or a mycorrhizal fungus, or just a mycorrhiza. So how does this symbiosis occur? Well, here you have a tree, and this tree is using the light from the sun to photosynthesize, which is the conversion of carbon dioxide into glucose, which then is which is then stored as biomass. This carbon can also be turned into lipids or carbohydrates, and then this is given to the mycorrhizae, where it is used to support its own growth. This mycorrhizae then goes deep into the soil, where it finds all of these different nutrients and micronutrients for the plant, most importantly nitrogen and phosphorus, but also all of these other extra nutrients. And it gives these nutrients to the plant. And so what we see is that certain metabolic processes in the plant are improved because of this. It's a bit like us when we eat all of our vegetables. You know, we're getting these extra nutrients, we're going to be healthier. It's the same for plants. And you might be thinking the plant is giving away a lot of its carbon to the mycorrhizae, around 20 to 40% of the carbon it gets from photosynthesis. But that doesn't mean that it's growing any smaller, because this process of photosynthesis is then more efficient because of this relationship. Actually, what we're typically seeing is improved yields and better growth. But not only that, it also is healthier and tastier food for us because it has all of these extra nutrients. It's more nutrient dense food, and it also tastes better as well. So they did experiments with strawberries where they grew them with and without mycorrhizal fungi. And then they did blind taste tests, and what they found was that people preferred the taste of the strawberries grown with these mycorrhizal fungi. So there are two main types of mycorrhizal fungi. There's more than this, actually, but we're just going to be focusing on two. And this is these ectomycorrhizal fungi, and these are buscular mycorrhizal fungi. So these ectomycorrhizal fungi, they grow on the outside of plant roots and forming this mantle around the root, and this is where the nutrient exchange occurs here. These arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi, on the other hand, they grow into the plant root and into the plant cells, where they branch out into these structures known as arbuscules. And this is where the nutrient exchange occurs here. The ectomycorrhizal fungi, they form symbioses with around 60% of all trees. So they only grow in forests. And this is around 1 to 2% of the plant species on Earth. Whereas these arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi, they form symbioses with around 80% of terrestrial plant species, including the top 10 global food crops. Of the ectomycorrhizal fungi, we have more than 20,000 different species, and that's because they come from a lot of different evolutionary origins. Whereas these arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi, there's only around 300 of them. And as I said, the ectomycorrhizal fungi, they only live in forests. Whereas the arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi, they live everywhere in all ecosystems pretty much, and including agriculture and in forests. And for that reason, I think they're more important for agroforestry. So let's see if you've been listening to these first few slides. I have the next Mentimeter here. What is AMF an abbreviation of? Is it additional mycorrhizal fungi, arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi, adaptive mycorrhizal fungi, or amazing mycorrhizal fungi? Okay, I think everyone's answered pretty fast. I don't think we're going to get another response. So yes, exactly. It stands for arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi. Well done for everyone who got that right. And we have this next question here. So I realized that I wrote this question not in the best way. So where do arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi live and where do ectomycorrhizal fungi live? What I mean by this question is where is the nutrient exchange occurring? And there's two correct answers for this one and two incorrect answers. So is it the ECM living inside or outside of the root, or the AMF living inside or outside of the root? Yeah. Well done, everyone. You all got it right. That is the correct answer. So moving on, where did these mycorrhizal fungi come from? How did they evolve to form this symbiosis with plant roots? So I've drawn this diagram, which is going to take us back a few billion years ago. So there is no life on land at this point. The Earth is a rocky hellscape. What we do have is we have life in the oceans, and some of this life are these two single-celled organisms called cyanobacteria and fungi. Now, I'm sure you've all heard of a fungus before, but perhaps not a cyanobacteria. So a cyanobacteria, it's actually not a bacteria. It is a photosynthetic microorganism, and it is the precursor to all plant life. So this was a few billion years ago. And then if we go back in time to around 400 to 500 million years ago, we see that the fungi and the cyanobacteria have come onto land. And they wouldn't be able to form these plants without this symbiosis with these fungi. They're not yet mycorrhizae, they're just fungus still right now. And what these fungi did is they broke down parts of the rock and released certain nutrients. And then the cyanobacteria could use this and then start to form more complex structures. These are still just very simple plants, and they still don't have a very complex root system yet. It's just very, very simple. And these plants are growing very, very small, only a couple of centimeters from the ground. So these are things like mosses and liverworts, for example. Now let's go forward again in time to around 300 million years ago. And what we see is this close evolution of this fungus with these simple plants has led to the evolution of these more complex plants. So plants that can grow taller, plants that can have roots that go deep into the soil. And what this symbiosis caused was a massive period of global cooling. So before this happened, the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere was around 3,000 parts per million. And because of this symbiosis, the concentration of carbon dioxide was reduced to around 300 parts per million. So to put that into context, where we were before the Industrial Revolution was around 300 parts per million, and we're about, I think, 400 parts per million now. So mycorrhizal fungi are really important for drawing down carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere as well. Then we go over to the other side. This is how the ectomycorrhizae evolve. And they didn't have this close coevolution with plants to start with. What they first did was they first evolved into saprotrophs. So for those of you who don't know, a saprotroph is an organism, in this case, a fungus that is able to convert, that gets its energy source from a dead and decaying matter. So if you're walking through a forest and you see a dead tree lying on the ground and you see mushrooms growing from that tree, there's a good chance that this is a saprotroph eating that tree and returning the nutrients back to the soil. But at some point in history, around 160 million years ago, these saprotrophs had decided that they'd had enough of eating dead things, and they wanted to get their energy from a more fresh source. And that's what they did. They switched their energy source from dead, decaying organic matter to living plant roots. And what we see today is that, well, some plants have lost their ability to form associations with these arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi. 80% of plants have this symbiosis with arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi, and we're seeing trees that have been evolved and colonized by both ectomycorrhizal fungi and arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi. So that was a quick trip through history. And the take-home messages that I want you to get from this is I want you to understand that there has been this close coevolution between plants and fungi, and that we would have no complex plant life on land without these mycorrhizal fungi, and we probably wouldn't be here without them. I also wanted you to understand that these ectomycorrhizal fungi and arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi have very different evolutionary origins, but they fulfill very similar niches in ecology. So mycorrhizae is less to do with genetics and with taxonomy, but more about the role they play, and that is this symbiosis with plant roots. So how are nutrients exchanged? So I'm only going to be discussing how they are exchanged with arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi, and that's just, because of time and because I know more about them. So there are three important structures for the exchange of nutrients within plants. We have the arbuscule, we have the hyphae, and we have the vesicle. So let's start with the hyphae. The hyphae are these things that I described as looking a little bit like these thinner plant roots earlier. They're these kind of tubes that are growing into the soil and then into the plant root as well. And then so what they do is they're growing around the soil, and a plant will send out a signal, and then the mycorrhizae will follow this signal, enter the plant roots, and enter into the plant cells like this. Where they form this structure known as an arbuscule. An arbuscule is Latin for little tree, and if you speak French, you might know that arb means tree as well. And that's because if you look at this upside down, it kind of looks like a tree with a stem and then this nice branching as well. And so this is where the nutrient exchange occurs. There's all of this branching to maximize the surface area, to maximize the efficiency of nutrient exchange. And finally, we have the vesicle. This is a storage cell, so it's a bit like a fat cell with us, where it's storing lipids. And then if anything happens to the plant or if anything happens to the mycorrhizae, it has this little backup energy source that it can use to carry on surviving. To just give you an idea of the size of these mycorrhizal fungi, this is a microscope slide measuring 2 centimeters by 7 centimeters. And these are little sections, little snippets of the tips of a plant root called Prunella vulgaris. And this is one of those plant roots under the microscope. And then inside this plant root, you can see these hyphae stained in blue, these arbuscules here, and these vesicles. But it's not just nutrient exchange that benefits the plant. We also have protection from disease. We have a better soil quality. Plants are showing improved tolerances and adaptability to certain conditions, and we also have improved plant biodiversity. So first of all, protection from disease. There are a few ways in which mycorrhizae protect the plant from disease. The first is that they are just taking up space in the soil. They are going around the plant roots and in the plant roots, and it's just harder for the pathogens to colonize the soil, for them to enter into the plant roots. So we have competition for space and nutrients there. The second way in which mycorrhizae protect from disease is because they stimulate the immune system of the plant. So it's a bit like us when we take our probiotics, our immune system is stimulated, and these plants are better able to fight off disease. And the final way in which mycorrhizae are able to protect from disease is just because they're giving all of these extra nutrients to the plant. They're just healthier. It's like us when we eat our vegetables. We're healthier and we're better able to fight off diseases. Next, we have improved soil quality. So these mycorrhizae are constantly growing and dying and reforming themselves. And when they do this, they are aerating the soil. They're also releasing certain molecules, such as glomalin, which is going to aggregate the soil. And while they're dying and reforming, they're also releasing a lot of carbon into the soil. And a high carbon content is very beneficial for your soil health. It's recruiting a lot of extra beneficial microorganisms, and you're just going to have a healthier microbiome overall. Plants that have been associated with mycorrhizae also show improved tolerances and adaptability to certain conditions. So plants are able to withstand higher concentrations of heavy metals, higher concentrations of salt. They're able to withstand flooding better and drought, for example. And where we see increased mycorrhizal biodiversity, we're also seeing increased plant biodiversity. But this is a little bit chicken and the egg, because where we're seeing more plant biodiversity, we're also seeing more mycorrhizal biodiversity. So they kind of help each other out in a way. So I have the next Mentimeter here for you guys. So I think you can give 1 to 3 responses here. Are you able to name 1, 2, or 3 ways in which mycorrhizae are able to improve plant health and fitness? I will just give it a couple of minutes. Yes, mycorrhizae improve the soil quality. They also provide the plant with nutrient, and there's this nutrient exchange. Protection against diseases, improved nutrient uptake, yeah, water retention, yeah. Okay, I'll give it another second and then I will move on. Yes, great. You've been listening, well done. Okay, so our next topic is the common mycelial network, otherwise referred to in the media as the Wood Wide Web. And this is a way in which trees are able to communicate with one another through the action of these mycorrhizae. So what these mycorrhizae do is they're growing through the soil, and then they can connect one plant to another plant. And this is where some nutrient exchange can occur. So you might be thinking the Wood Wide Web, this sounds a lot like the World Wide Web, the internet, and that's because there are a lot of similarities with them. So where we have the World Wide Web, where we have data and information exchange in the World Wide Web, in the Wood Wide Web, we have this nutrient and information exchange. In the World Wide Web, where it's information is sent through cables and satellites, in the Wood Wide Web, it's these hyphae, these mycelial threads. Where the Wood Wide Web is sending electrical signals, in the Wood Wide Web, it's chemical signals. And where the World Wide Web connects devices from all over the world, the Wood Wide Web connects entire ecosystems. And this makes me think that maybe Entish, the talking trees from Lord of the Rings, maybe aren't fiction after all. So speaking of talking trees, what is it that they talk about? So I have 3 pictures here and I'm going to explain them one by one. So on the left-hand side, we have this little sapling. And even though here it's receiving light, maybe in some forests, they have a very dense canopy cover and these saplings aren't able to reach the light. So what this sapling is able to do is it's able to connect to this Wood Wide Web, to this mycelial network, where this mycelia, this mycorrhizae can connect it to one of these larger trees. These larger trees can then send this little sapling carbon so that it's able to grow until it's big enough to reach the sun for itself. In the middle picture, we have an aphid biting into a plant. So what these trees can do is if they've been bitten by an aphid, they can send out warning molecules, signaling molecules to other trees in the network, sort of warning them, telling them to prepare for an oncoming attack. And so these trees, when they receive these signals, they can upregulate their immune systems, and they can produce certain defense molecules and, produce molecules that are not going to be so tasty for the aphids. And finally, on this right-hand side here, we have an evergreen tree, a Douglas fir, and a deciduous tree, a birch tree. So deciduous trees, they are only green, so they only photosynthesize in the spring and summer. Whereas evergreen trees, they're forever green. They're photosynthesizing throughout the whole year. And so what this evergreen tree can do is it can give carbon to the deciduous tree in the winter months when the deciduous tree isn't able to photosynthesize. And this happens vice versa. In the spring and summer, the birch, the deciduous tree, can give carbon back to the Douglas fir, to the evergreen tree. And this is really nice because we're seeing for the first time more collaboration in nature than what we once thought. You know, before we were going with everything Charles Darwin said, which is survival of the fittest, competition, competition, competition. And of course, that theory still holds. But, you know, we're just seeing more collaboration, which I think is really nice. So what this guy Byler did was, and his colleagues, was he attempted to map a part of the Wood Wide Web in this Douglas fir forest in, I believe, British Columbia in the States. And what he did was he measured a 30 by 30 meter plot, which is this black square here. And he took 400 different samples of soil, which are represented by these black dots here. What he was looking for in these soil samples were two species of ectomycorrhizal fungi, this Rhizopogon vesiculosus and this Rhizopogon viniculare. And then he went on to figure out which trees these mycorrhizae were connected to, and these trees are represented by these green blobs here. And what he found is that most trees were connected by at least one of these mycorrhizal fungi, and that the older the tree, the more mycorrhizal connections that they had. So this is most likely the oldest and the largest tree in the system, and this is often referred to in the media as the mother tree. And so now what I want you to think about is, this is only with two different species of mycorrhizal fungi. In this forest, there was actually around 100 different species. So now I want you to imagine how complicated this picture would be if it was with all of those mycorrhizal fungi, and if it was across a whole forest ecosystem. And then you get an idea of how complex and interconnected this system is. In this study done by the Crowther Lab in Switzerland, they attempted to figure out what kind of mycorrhizal communities were living where. And they did this across forests all over the globe. So this is just forest, this isn't grasslands, this isn't in agriculture, this is just in forestry systems. And what they found was that these ectomycorrhizal fungi, the ones that grow on the outside of roots, they're living in the northern hemisphere mostly, in these cold and dry climates in the higher latitudes. Whereas these arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi are found more in the lower latitude, in the global south, with these tropical, hot and wet climates. And this is also another reason why I'm focusing a little more on AMF. And this is because, well, they're more important in agriculture, first of all, than the ectomycorrhizae, but they're also a lot more prevalent in the areas that we're working in. So that's what I want to say about the Wood Wide Web. Next, I'm going to briefly just discuss the potential for mycorrhizae in some climate change mitigation. So to give you some context, I just wanted to explain to you how much carbon is stored in soils. So there's 25 billion tons of carbon stored in the soil on our globe, which is more than everything in the atmosphere and more than all plant and animal life combined. And mycorrhizae are responsible for cycling through, removing 13 billion tons of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere every year, which is the equivalent to around 1/3 of annual fossil fuel emissions. And how does it store the carbon? So, as I already explained before, carbon dioxide is converted into biomass, lipids, and carbohydrates, which are then given to the mycorrhizae for their own growth. Mycorrhizae are a little bit like us and all other organisms in the fact that they breathe, they respire, they convert oxygen and carbon into carbon dioxide. And so that's what happens to some of this carbon. It's released back into the atmosphere. But some of this carbon is stored in the soil as the mycorrhizae releases certain molecules, or as it dies. When it dies, it creates this fungal necromass, and the carbon is just incorporated back into the soil. However, this process is being disrupted because we're damaging our mycorrhizae through intensive agriculture. So directly on the agricultural fields, when we're spraying them with pesticides and fertilizers, we're killing the mycorrhizae in the agricultural soils themselves. But then also when it starts to rain, these chemicals are being brought into our forests, which is damaging the mycorrhizae there. Of course, pollution from other industries is damaging them as well, and deforestation. So when we're cutting down the trees, we're cutting off the mycorrhiza's main energy source, and so it's less able to draw carbon down from the atmosphere. So I wanted you to understand it's not just trees and plants that are storing carbon, but it's also the soil and the mycorrhizae and the action of other microorganisms as well that are playing a role here. In this study, this is where I got the figure for the 13 billion tons of carbon stored by mycorrhizae every year. This review mycorrhizal mycelium as a global carbon pool. And they saw that there are a lot less ectomycorrhizal fungi than these arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi. However, these ectomycorrhizal fungi, they store a lot more carbon in the soil than these arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi. And this is going to be a problem as climate change accelerates, as we're changing the conditions for which they live. So these AMF are going to kind of dominate more in the regions that the ectomycorrhizal fungi lived as climate change accelerates. And so since AMF have the ability to store less carbon than the ectomycorrhizal, this is problematic as climate change accelerates and produces more favorable environments. So that's all I want to say on carbon. So I'm going to take you through just a couple of experiments that have been done with mycorrhizae. And what I did was these are some very popular plants, crops, and trees that we're using in agroforestry in the global south. And I found that mycorrhizal fungi benefit all of these plants here. Now, I'm not going to go through every single study with you. We're just going to look at a couple. So let's first take a look at cocoa. Cocoa was described by the first author as a highly mycorrhizal plant. So that just means it forms a lot of mycorrhizal symbioses. And in this first paper, in this first experiment, this was a series of laboratory experiments where they inoculated cocoa seedlings with arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi. And they saw that the cocoa seedlings inoculated with these mycorrhizal fungi were growing a lot better, and this is probably because of enhanced water, mineral, and nutrient uptake. In this second experiment, this was an experiment done in the field, and they investigated agroforestry versus monoculture in Peru. And they showed that the agroforestry system showed that the cocoa plant had a higher mycorrhization. I also want to explain to you that cadmium is naturally occurring in Peruvian soils at quite high concentrations. And cadmium is toxic to us, it's carcinogenic for us, but also for plants, it disrupts the biochemical pathways in plants as well. And so in Peru, a lot of the fruit and vegetables grown in Peru that are coming over to the EU are actually not within the safe limits that the EU has defined. And so they can't come to the EU anymore. So that's to give you an idea of how much cadmium can be in these plants. So then they tested this cadmium in the agroforestry soil and in the monoculture soil. And what they saw that the cadmium content was actually higher in the agroforestry soil. Now, despite this, what they saw was that there was less cadmium in the cocoa that was growing in the agroforestry soil, despite there being more cadmium in the soil. So they hypothesized that this was because the mycorrhizae was having a protective effect on the cocoa. Now, there is still further research to be done here, but since there is other evidence that shows that mycorrhizae protect from heavy metals, this isn't so far out of the realms of possibility. Now we're going to look at these two nitrogen-fixing trees, Calliandra calotheris and Phaedherbia albida. They're very popular agroforestry trees. And before I explain these experiments, I just wanted to explain to you what nitrogen-fixing trees actually are. So nitrogen-fixing trees, they don't fix nitrogen themselves. They recruit other beneficial microorganisms, nitrogen-fixing bacteria such as rhizobium, to their roots as well. And they form these little nodules, these kind of balls. And these balls are filled with these bacteria that are able to convert atmospheric nitrogen into nitrates and ammonia, which the plants are able to take up and use as a sort of fertilizer. So in these experiments, in both of these experiments, they showed that inoculating with mycorrhizal fungi improved growth, improved seedling survival rate, and improved the nodulation in the roots of these plants. It improved the nodulation of roots in these plants. So that implies that more nitrogen is able to be fixed. Now it's really good to have these kind of trees in farming systems, in agroforestry, because they fix this nitrogen. You can reduce the amount of fertilizer that you're going to be using. So our next section is how we can improve mycorrhizae. I'm hoping that I've convinced you already of the benefits that mycorrhizae can provide to your plant and soil. And now maybe you're wondering, how can I improve this myself? So there's two approaches you can go down. You can go down the inoculation approach or a more natural approach. So let's start with inoculation. First, let me tell you what inoculation is. This is the deliberate introduction of a mycorrhizae to a system. And we're going to start with inoculating in forestry systems. So I'm going to just explain this picture first. This is a pellet from the company called Rhizocore. It's a UK-based company. And what they do is they infect these pellets with ectomycorrhizal fungi, and then they plant them next to the roots of seedlings when trees are being planted. And they're making sure that they're using these ectomycorrhizal fungi that are native to the soils. Unfortunately, there isn't really a commercially available inoculum present in the global south. And that's because this is really, it's really kind of just taking off and there's less money there. But what can be done as a sort of more natural inoculation approach is, if you're planting a tree, so for a small scale project, if you're planting some trees, what you can do is, if there's a forest within a couple of kilometers away from you, you can take like a little aliquot of this soil and you can just sprinkle it on the roots of your seedlings just before you're planting. Now, I say this should only be done on a small scale because there is a small risk of spreading pathogens, and we also don't want to be taking all of the soil out of our natural forests. In agriculture, this is typically done with arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi, and you can either add spores of arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi, or you can add root fragments of a plant that has already been infected by mycorrhizal fungi. This can be applied to the soil or the seed when you're planting, and it can come in a powder, a liquid, or a granular form. But if you do decide that you would like to inoculate with mycorrhizae, there's a few important things that you need to be considering. So first of all, is the mycorrhiza suitable for the area? So is the plant that I'm planting, is it a mycorrhizal plant? Does it form associations with the mycorrhizae species that I'm going to be introducing? What climate am I living in? How much rainfall is there? What's the humidity? Things like this. These are also going to impact the mycorrhizae. And then what kind of soil do you have? What soil type do you have? Is it clay? Is it sandy? What's the pH of your soil? What is the nutrient status of your soil? All of these things are going to impact how your mycorrhizae grows and how it behaves. Next, we need to think about how complex the system is. So how degraded or complex the soil is, for example. So if you have this super degraded soil where it's really hard for things to grow, it might be quite nice to add mycorrhizal fungi there to kind of kickstart this biofertilizer effect. However, if you're in a very, very complex system, so if you're in an organic system and it's been organic for years and you have these big polycultures with tens of different plant species, then I would say there's probably already quite a nice mycorrhizal community already established. And the introduction of more mycorrhizae, it probably won't make any difference. And most likely the mycorrhizae that you're adding will just be outcompeted anyway and won't survive. You also need to think about if you're using any inputs. If you're using a lot of pesticides and fungicides, then they're just going to kill your mycorrhizae straight off. And if you're applying synthetic fertilizers, this disrupts the nutrient balance. And then you might want to consider either using less fertilizer or going for a strain of fungus that can withstand higher nitrogen concentrations, for example. Third application, you want to ensure that the mycorrhizae is able to reach the roots of your plant. So are you applying this inoculum close enough to the root or seed? And it needs to really be within a millimeter or two of your root. And then finally, the supplier that you're going with, is the inoculum proven effective? Are they trustworthy? Do they have demo plots? Do they have science-backed evidence that their product actually works? So I've included this slide. Don't read all of it. There's quite a lot of information here, but it was just to give you an idea of the kinds of different arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi that are out there. And it was also so that you can understand that not all mycorrhizae are created equally. So if we go back to an earlier slide where I was describing all of the different plant benefits, not all mycorrhizae do all of those benefits. Some mycorrhizae might be better at protecting against heavy metals, for example, whereas some might be better protecting against drought. Some mycorrhizal fungi might be better adapted to alkaline soils and some better adapted to acidic soils or low nutrient, high nutrient, etc., etc. So this is just something to be aware of. So the other route that you can take, which I kind of prefer, is that you can try and improve your mycorrhiza in a natural way. So just supporting sort of the natural soil as it is and making your soil that you already have healthier. And the best way that you can do this is simply just by leaving your soil alone. So practicing some of these non-disturbance techniques. So for example, no-till or low-till, what you're doing when you're tilling is you're breaking up all of these different hyphal strands and making it really hard for the mycorrhizae to grow and proliferate. Of course, if you're at the start of your project and you have this really compact soil, then of course you should still be tilling to get some air in. But just so you know, if you have an already established system, if you're constantly plowing, that's not going to be doing your mycorrhizae any favors. Second, avoid chemical additions. I think I already mentioned that fungicides and pesticides, they just kill the mycorrhizae straight off. But then the fertilizer addition, the synthetic fertilizer addition, this disrupts the nutrient balance in the soil and the mycorrhizae don't like that so much. I also see synthetic fertilizers as a bit of a junk food for plants. So when the plants have all of this fertilizer, it's like they're getting all of their calories, but they're not getting all of their nutrients. And then they become lazy, and then they don't send out these signals to mycorrhizae anymore because they don't care about getting their micronutrients. They don't care about doing their exercise, let's say. So what we can do instead is we can have a diverse selection of plants. And it's best if you include native species because it's more likely that these native mycorrhizae have evolved with these native species of plants. You want to be checking that your plants are mycorrhizal as well. That's not to say you should never ever be planting non-mycorrhizal plants. But if your goal is to improve your mycorrhizae, then you should be trying to incorporate as many mycorrhizal plants as possible. And also try and avoid genetically modified species as well. Now, that's not to say I'm inherently against GMO species, but when we're knocking out or adding in certain genes to give the plant a certain phenotype, a certain traits, what we're also doing is we might accidentally knock out some other genes, and this isn't immediately obvious when we're growing these plants. And one of these genes that we've accidentally disrupted might be the genes that are sending these signaling molecules to attract mycorrhizae. So we're seeing less mycorrhizal symbiosis with GMO plants. And the last thing you can do is just try and improve the carbon content in your soil, doing things like the addition of leaf litter for mulching and the addition of biochar, for example, is going to promote your carbon in your soil and make it a nicer home for your mycorrhiza. So we're almost at the end of my presentation. Thank you all for listening. I'm just going to quickly go through this summary here because I realize we don't have so much time left to ask questions. So what did we learn today? We learned that there are two main types of mycorrhiza. We have these ectomycorrhizal fungi, and these are buscular mycorrhizal fungi. We learned that agroforestry systems in the global south are going to be benefiting more from our buscular mycorrhizal associations than these ectomycorrhizal associations. And that's because they prefer tropical climates, but also because they're relevant in both forestry and agriculture. We learned that mycorrhizae improve plant fitness through nutrient uptake, improving the plant's resilience to things like biotic factors and pathogens and abiotic factors, but also by improving the soil. We learned that plants are able to communicate with one another through the World Wide Web, in which they can share information and nutrients. We learned that mycorrhizae are responsible for removing a lot of carbon from the atmosphere and play an important role in global carbon dynamics. We also learned that we can promote our mycorrhizae by having a higher biodiversity of plants and adding fewer chemicals into our agricultural systems. And finally, that there are many commercially available inoculums present, but if you're thinking about doing this, you should research that carefully. So, I forgot to restart this one. Or did someone already vote? Yeah, so I've got this last question here, which is the same as the question at the beginning. What do you know now about mycorrhizal fungi? Do you know a lot about them? After this presentation, you know a bit about them, the name rings a bell, or you've never heard of them. And I'm hoping I'm hoping that you have now heard of them at least. Okay, great. I myself, I think I would still vote. I know a bit about them because, yeah, I think you will know the more you learn about a topic, the more you realize you don't know, and there's still a lot for me to learn as well. Okay, so thank you. I'm going to move on, and I'm going to return to this quote that I put in at the start of the presentation as well. Farmers of the future work together with their fungi, and I hope this is more understandable now for you. So thank you so much for your attention. I'm going to open up the floor now if anyone has any questions.
Yes, thank you, Beth, for the presentation. It was very nice, very insightful. We have one question, so please, if Martin can open his mic and elaborate a bit more. Oh, your mic is off? No.
Yeah, sorry. Here I am. Hi, guys. Beth, thank you very much for the presentation. Really insightful. I'm Martin, a colleague of yours from the Carbon Bank, and I work on forestation projects for farmers in Brazil. So really insightful, this topic, because we are trying to store carbon. And yeah, I learned a lot about it here. My question was actually purely out of personal interest when you were explaining about the trees actually helping each other through the Wood Wide Web, that some different tree species like the fir would even help a tree that loses its leaves in winter. And you mentioned already that it sort of contradicts the evolution theory in a way, that you would assume that these species are competing for light or space, and still they're helping each other. Do you already have an idea why, or is that still unknown to science?
So I think they're still sort of researching this, but I think it's just like the mycorrhizae or the trees have maybe realized that they're better off helping each other in a way. So the evergreens are less able to photosynthesize in the summer than the deciduous, and then vice versa. So yeah, I can't give you a straightforward answer or like an exact answer, but I mean, I guess that's what I would say.
Yeah, nice. So they are actually literally transferring nutrients, so like glucose and stuff, from a tree into the mycelium network and then to the other tree.
Yeah, there's only
They're
been like
feeding each other.
There's only been 1 or 2 experiments that have shown this occurring, so it's still a little bit of a theory right now, but there's still more research going into this. So hopefully we'll have more answers in the coming years.
Cool. So if I translate that into practice, for example, if I were to be planting on a plot of degraded land of a farmer, then I could recommend to start in an area where there is already some vegetation, because there are probably more mycelium networks over there. So that would improve the chances of those trees actually surviving and growing better.
I think so, yeah. Yeah. Of course, it depends on the system and what kind of plants are already there and what you're planting. But I would say in general, yes.
Interesting. Thank you.
Thanks, Martin, for your question. If anyone else have a question, please feel free to open the mic. Otherwise, I will say that thank you again, Beth, for the presentation. The session will be recorded and saved. Oh, yes, Martin.
Yeah, well, if nobody else has questions, I have another one, if that's okay.
Of course.
Yeah, you mentioned this company, Rhizocore, who is actually producing these inoculation tools to help the growth of a newly planted forest. And for what I understand from your presentation, like I said, I'm working in Brazil, so these ECM products will probably not be the most useful there.
Probably not, no.
No, so but do you think the AMF products could be applied there? And you said the industry isn't really picking up, but would it be worthwhile for me to look into partners of companies in the global north who are applying this and who have some best practices to see if I can help that to boost our afforestation projects in Brazil?
I think that would be really nice. Yeah, like as you said, it is only, or I think there are still some ectomycorrhizal communities like scattered in the global south, but it is dominated by these muscular mycorrhizal fungi, and there are a lot of AMF inoculums commercially available. But yeah, the money is in the northern hemisphere, right? It's in the west. So these inoculums are really made to support, yeah, the northern hemisphere. I know that there has been some research started in the global south, so in Ghana, I think, and there's also a company that are providing mycorrhizae in Peru. So there's more of these ectomycorrhizal fungi there. But I think it would be really nice if companies would start branching out to the south, indeed, yeah. But like I said, especially these for forestry systems, it is all relatively new and there's not so many companies out there yet.
All right, thank you. Could you share the name of the Peruvian company with me? Then I can see if I can reach out.
I can't remember it off the top of my head.
Cool.
But I will, yeah.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? We have 3 minutes left. Okay, then thank you all for coming. I hope you found this presentation informative. Thank you, Perina. And yeah, I'm going to close it. Goodbye, everyone. Have a nice afternoon.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Very interesting.
Thank you, Beth.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.